we have Senior Counsel Emiel van Vuuren, who will share with us the legal and ethical dimensions of aviation, an area that shapes accountability in profound ways in our industry. Emiel was admitted as an attorney in 1997 and was called to the bar in 1998, going on to be conferred senior counsel status in 2017. He is a member of the Johannesburg Society of Advocates and General Counsel of the Bar of South Africa. He has served on the Johannesburg Bar Council, as well as the Chief Justice's National Efficiency Enhancement Committee. He also serves as an arbitrator on the Arbitration Foundation of South Africa's commercial panel. With a career spanning nearly 3 decades, his practice focuses on aviation, commercial, and insurance litigation, with experience across multiple jurisdictions, including South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Kenya, Somalia, and the United States. In addition to his litigation work, Emiel also regularly sits as an arbitrator and an appeal arbitrator, and he has acted as a judge at the High Court of South Africa. He is also an accomplished advocacy trainer, contributing to both local and international programs in cities such as Hong Kong, Sydney, and Oxford. Emiel is lastly also an avid aviation enthusiast. Emiel brings both professional expertise and genuine passion for the field. Please welcome Emiel van Vuuren.
Thank you. I don't do the music justice. Right. I'd like to talk to you about the topic of knowing, which is perhaps slightly different to mere knowledge. Last year we spoke about how the law did not consider small things, but how important small things can be when you forget a split pin in an assembly. Our actions are very often judged, not only by judges, not only by our peers, but very often by our own families, our loved ones. The law looks at a couple of things when considering whether or not we are perhaps culpable or liable for what we do. One of the ingredients to that test, the test for negligence, is what is called foreseeability or foresight. The law, of course, encompasses far more than what we normally see on television. We see programs about litigation, and they might even be quite enjoyable. But what the law also seeks to do, and we often overlook this, is to keep us honest, to keep us informed, to keep us knowledgeable. That is a different function of the law, and that is the hard part that many of you had to go through when studying for your commercial pilot's license, air law. It's hard work to do that. That's a segment of law, very important. So those parts of the law aims to make things orderly and very much to make them safe. But those rules often lag. Law often lags. It's slow. Not only litigation, but also law. But that, I would suggest to you, has a lot to do with human ingenuity. You can hardly have rules about how AI should be applied or how computer giants should treat one another at the get-go. So when these things started, there were very few rules, if rules at all, at the time. An example, for instance, is when did aviation law really start? We know that the Wright brothers took to the air in 1903. What were the rules? One would instinctively think that there were no rules. there was nothing. They had to rely on their own good sense of what might be safe or unsafe at the time. Now, it is quite important to, for instance, another example is, were there any rules about supersonic flight when the Wright brothers took to the air? It wasn't even contemplated. So, very interesting phenomenon, though, is that it probably did not start around the time of the Wright brothers. The history of aviation law, I want to suggest to you, did not start after that. It actually started before that. You may not believe me, but it started about 120 years before the Wright brothers took to the air. Because in 1783, the first known aviation rule was that in France, shortly after the Montgolfier brothers started with their balloon flights, you had to get permission to fly. So it's a bit of cold water on the Wright brothers right there. Later on, in about 1899, there was, and think about our times of drones and of aerial attacks and of devices for accurate bombing. There was a rule of law in 1899 that during warfare you were not allowed to drop projectiles from balloons. How things have changed. Those laws developed, although they lagged, into what we now know as rules that really have our safety in mind, ultimately culminating in what we've heard earlier in the rules set forth by ICAO. So 120 years later, we have the Wright brothers in the air, and look at where we are, almost another similar period beyond that. The law also imposes on us other duties, and there are other rules that we need to comply with. It's not only the published legal rules. Andre spoke about SOPs a moment ago. There are the contracts of insurance that you all have. There are flight manuals. There are so many systems that impose more rules than we can ever memorize. And that's why what I'm going to say might sound a little controversial in the end. Because what I'm going to talk about as a common theme is knowledge or knowing. That being so, it has everything to do with the foreseeability test. It's all good and well after the fact to suggest that we know, looking backward, looking with the benefit of hindsight, what the position is, and then judge people. We are biologically geared to do that, but it is the wrong way around, and as we stand here today, I hope that we do not stand in judgment of one another. I very often find when we do advocacy training that there's a human tendency and trait. Once you think you know what you're doing, you rush out and you will wing it, no pun intended. We find that very often with advocates as well. And we try and teach them not to conduct themselves in what we call Christopher Columbus advocacy. Christopher Columbus set sail when he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he got back, he didn't know where he had been. Let us not fly in that way for a start. It sounds harsh, but that is the reality of it. I want to get to the first notion is the law recognizes in its foreseeability test that we do not judge with the benefit of hindsight. And it hopefully comes as quite a relief. I think it's quite an unsophisticated way simply to use the benefit of hindsight to judge the foreseeability or the foresight that we expected a person to have. So, foreseeability, very important. In law, we often talk about the fact that there's this legal fool's super tool called the retrospectroscope. It is to be avoided at all cost. But what do we have, and what is the tool that I want to impart? Because I can't stand here and tell you what the law is, but I can leave you with a thought. Call it a lens, a borescope, a CT scanner for microscopic metal fatigue striations and cracks, the Ray-Bans to see better. Something to consider. And that is a thought that was left by Donald Rumsfeld. You will recall him as about 20 years back, the US Secretary of Defense. And he used the phrases, it's a matrix of 4 things that I want you to try on. He spoke about known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. It's not an easy fit, but once you get used to it, we tend to see quite a lot. Known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. Now, I listened to the previous speakers, and I can speak from a perspective of relative inexperience. You've all heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect or the curve. We begin with a new venture, and we ascend to what they call the top of Mount Stupid. Then we drop down as we learn more into the valley of despair. I'm not going to be able to do this. Then gradually we start with the slope of enlightenment, and we learn more, and our hours come up, and we're not at Bruce's hours yet. Then ultimately we reach a plateau of sustainability where we feel comfortable and we're happy and so on. But what Dunning-Kruger doesn't include, but I suggest we add to that, is that all of these stages are pregnant with a risk. And one of the big risks with the egos we all have is, in part, perhaps showmanship. But the most dangerous thing I would suggest to you in the plateau of sustainability is complacency that might settle in. So, I'm going to go to stories, and it's going to turn into something more interesting soon. Firstly, let's see if you can identify what these things are. Let's talk about known knowns. These are well-defined events. We know the burn rate. We can calculate our fuel requirement. We can calculate our endurance. We know what to focus on. We know that so many gallons will give you this kind of endurance on a particular machine. We should know, as Bruce told us, what the emergency procedures are. What are our weight limitations? What is the maximal up weight? Buta spoke about the available diagrams that we could look at. What's the weather? These are all, generally speaking, known knowns. Then we have known unknowns. These are expected or foreseeable conditions, events or outcomes. We know they can happen, often will, but we do not necessarily know when it may occur. Now, what is important here for the law is that ignorance of these things will not be an excuse for us. More so, not at home. So, for instance, you might have limited data. You might know what the weather is at Lanseria, and you might know what the weather is at Mafeking. And you might use all sorts of apps to try and extrapolate and interpolate what the weather might be in between. So it's known that there will be weather. It's unknown exactly what it will be. So these known unknowns are generally on our radar. Then we get to yet another, and that is the unknown knowns. We spoke about complacency. This is where it operates. You know something, but in that moment, it's unknown. You might have had a fight. You might have had other things on your mind. So you have the knowledge, but it's not within your RAM. You're not using it. Other things might be the automation of complacency. Think about being on autopilot. I have no experience of that, I should disclose. But I'm told that one should be on the ready, because if that system failures, where do you pick up on the data that will allow you to continue that flight, especially at critical moment or phase of flight? There's also, and we've heard this today, the normalization of defiance. I've done it this way so many times. I know this machine. I know this pad. The wind is always from the north, so that's how I approach, and you continue with that. So it's really complacency, normalization of defiance, and so forth. Then we have unknown unknowns. These are the truly unexpected or unforeseeable conditions. What happens here is this is where the law may or may not help us. This is where standard operating procedures might help us. It might not be on our radar for the day. It might not be an issue that we're thinking of. We may not think about striation cracks in a crevice or whatever it might be. But following the rules, following, of course, the guidelines will assist you in capturing and catching some of these unknown unknowns. So knowing that there will be unknown unknowns is why the development of rules and the time-based inspections receive so much emphasis in aviation. Because our own reliance on human awareness is simply not enough. You're not going to pick up on those things during even the 1 hour pre-flight necessarily. So, can I invite you now with this, I hope it wears a bit easier now, to try and think about the known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and unknown unknowns when I work through a couple of examples. Now, the first example I will call the end of instruction. The first is, the setting is, of course, a flight school, far, far from here. Now, the flight school has insurance. The insurance policy reads, flying instruction. Whenever the aircraft mentioned in the schedule hereto is being used for the purpose of flying instruction, the liability of the insurer in terms of this section is not extended to either the instructor or the pilot undergoing such instruction, neither of those being regarded as a passenger. That's not necessarily what's in your policy, but knowledge of what is might be very important. So what does the law say about instruction in this country far, far away? Where does it stop? Where does instruction stop in relation to a particular exercise? Am I satisfied that my student has the necessary competency, the wherewithal on the day for a particular action or exercise? Do I know these things in my position as an instructor? Are they known knowns? Or are they unknown knowns? Because it didn't occur to me to consider them when we boarded. So, I'm going to read to you, and firstly, just a disclosure, no one is mentioned by name, so don't try and identify the individuals involved and so forth. But what I regrettably can't say is that no one got hurt in some of the examples I mentioned. And I do this with the greatest of respect to those involved, and also those who might even have been at fault, because there, for the grace of God, go I. So the first is, the claim brought by this particular family reads, in its allegations, and what they say with foreseeability and knowledge in mind, is exposing the deceased to an unnecessary risk of injury of which he knew or ought to have known would occur, failing to observe the mandated post-flight procedures, thus creating the circumstances that precipitated and caused the accident, failing to exercise the care and skill reasonably expected of an instructing pilot in the circumstances, failing to issue proper instructions to the deceased during the post-flight section of the training. We're going to go into the other side of the story in a moment, but I want you to put your judicial hats on and try not to judge with the benefit of hindsight, but look at the foreseeability component. But that's because that's the part we'll learn from. The instructor wrote the following, and it's been slightly adapted to remove identities. On a particular date, the deceased took part in a dual flight as part of her training under the supervision of the instructor, who was the pilot in command on the flight. At about 9 o'clock, the deceased, under the instruction of the instructor, landed the aircraft at the airport and safely parked the aircraft. Once parked, the deceased exited the aircraft to undertake the post-flight checklist as per the instructions of the instructor. Unbeknown to the deceased, the instructor had not turned off the engine of the single propeller aircraft. All right, so those are still the allegations. Here we get to the instructor's version. After routine inspection, checks of the aircraft, we boarded the aircraft. In the cockpit was me with her as the pilot. I was there as her instructor. She was preparing for her first solo. She successfully flew the aircraft as per my instructions. We were in the air for a while, and she properly and successfully landed the aircraft. She properly parked the aircraft as per the rules. There were other students who were waiting on the queue for their turn. It was the instructor for all of them, or I was the instructor for all of them on the day. She was finished for the day. We had been training in the same manner throughout the week. She performed her piloting well on that day. I was still filing my progress reports for her training. I'm supposed to enter scores and record her performance and the evaluation before I let the other student in. In this type of aircraft, the cockpit allows space for only 2 passengers. I was in the cockpit with her alone. I assisted her during takeoff and landing until she safely parked the plane on the ground. After the student had parked the aircraft as per the strict safety regulations, she opened the door of the aircraft and went out of the aircraft. She banged the door. This was strange, as it would seem that she was in a hurry to go somewhere. The 2-seater Cessna 152 type aircraft has fixed wings on top of its body. There is a strut stretching to the belly of the aircraft after the door. It is between the door and the nose. The aircraft has 2 blades fixed on the nose. The aircraft has a strut that serves as a protection against the blades affixed to the nose. When one alights from the aircraft, you step on stepper affixed to the strut. This assists in alighting from the cabin. When the door is opened, it is designed to rest on the strut to avoid one from crawling underneath towards the propeller blades. The stepper is on a spring. I suddenly heard noise from outside. I stretched over to get vision of what the commotion was all about, but I could not properly see the grounds. I switched off the engine and alighted from the aircraft. I noticed on stepping out that she had been hit by the propeller and badly injured. Then he continues and he says, she defied all safety precautions and safeguards whilst outside the aircraft. At the time, she was not under instruction. She was out of the aircraft completely. She had completed her training, he says. I was informed by the ground guide, who was about 40 meters away, that he saw her coming out of the aircraft. She bent down and passed under the protective strut after shutting the door. She quickly moved towards the propeller. She was moving very fast. When she realized that the propeller was running, she attempted to turn around to go back to the direction of the aircraft door. She, in the process, unfortunately swung her left hand. It was hit by the blade almost at the wrist. In the process, the thigh was also cut by the blade. She attempted to hold on to and support herself on the aircraft, but she was not able. As a result, she fell to the ground. Ambulance was called, rushed to hospital, and she succumbed to her injuries. Then the instructors on the defense, I could not know where and why she alighted in the manner and where she was hurrying to. She did not go through the shutdown checklist and unbuckled her seat and opened the door quickly. She had struggled with this course, and other students who started with her, including an acquaintance, had actually managed to advance in the course. She was not a very stable student. Her grades and performance were low. The accident was not connected in any way whatsoever with the course or training, as she completely was outside the aircraft and had completed disembarking on the tarmac and shut the door of the plane. She had finished her assignment and left the aircraft. So, true story. Were there known knowns? Known knowns to the instructor, to the student? Was there complacency? Was it too rushed on this day? Was it the flight school's fault? Was it the fault of the instructor? Is the student to be blamed, as the instructor indicated? Again, it's easy to judge in hindsight. We naturally do that, and I'm quite sure you feel the draw to that. We use these incidents to learn from them. But can you see any element of foreseeability here on her part, and very much so perhaps on the part of the instructor? So, known knowns, unknown knowns, etc. The next story and you will all know what that might mean. That's Lanseria to a compulsory reporting point as part of a much longer journey, which you'll see here. Imagine a ferry flight that had to be postponed for a day or 2 or 3 on account of weather. Lynell spoke about the escalation of commitment. This had to happen at some point. What would your threshold be for an appropriate gap in the weather? Weather notoriously provides examples, I think, of both knowns and of unknowns. The law knows this. The law tells us a lot about distance from cloud, visibility, flight rules, whether it's VFR or IFR. If you encounter the known unknown, do you know what you will do? Do you know what you will do when you get there? Or do you start thinking about what you possibly might do only when it occurs? So, here is a bit more weather data on the day. I've enlarged it ever so slightly. You can go through that very briefly. So that was the weather in the 2 locations. That's Lanseria and Mafeking at the time. The first part of the plan, you will see that I encircled and just simply drew a straight line. I apologize for those who are scrutinizing it because it goes through a restricted area. Apologies for that. But that's not the route that was taken. So you can see Lanseria, and you can see the smaller circle being the pedal compulsory reporting point. So the important part to know about this flight also is that there were 2 aircraft involved in this. So 2 who departed about 3 or 4 minutes apart. We'll call it the red aircraft and the blue aircraft. Here's the reporting point, and you can see quite interestingly the marking of it. You can also see the Morningside farm, and you can see that there's a landing strip, tarred landing strip. I'm being placed on terms for time. I'll move on. During this flight, something happened to one of the aircraft. It lost contact at some point in time, and a factual observer using 2 sticks explained what he saw. He was in that area, very close to where it happened. This is between Pedal and the Morningside strip. Low flying, almost in the position that he points out there, this aircraft circled. What you don't see there is he added that he thought he saw smoke, but not sure. That is the position where this happened. So, what you see on screen now and you'll see that the red aircraft departed at 10:55, and the blue aircraft 3 minutes later. They followed one flight plan. The blue aircraft followed the blue route in the upper aspect, the northern aspect. The red aircraft followed the red route. You can see how they both worked towards Pedal. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, they lost contact at some point in time. What does this flight path tell you? Taking into account the weather we knew about earlier and so forth. Now, you can see that the desire of those flight paths, and you'll see the blue dots, are all honing in on the compulsory reporting point. Bruce, one of those rules that you now believe you must get to. There are times when you need to be clever. You can see the blue route. That pilot was circumnavigating something. What was it? I think we all instinctively know what it might well have been. We've seen it partly in the reporting. Do we know what actually happened? We don't. What are the knowns here? What are the unknowns? It's quite interestingly, and I don't know whether any of you are foreseeing how this accident might have occurred and what might have led to it. But the interesting thing is you'll see at the top of the image, that's where you saw that photograph of the wreckage. Yet, in that big encircled area, a whole lot of debris was found. And that is approximately a few hundred meters, if not a kilometer apart. So it shows the inexactitude of hindsight analysis, but it triggers us to consider what is known and what is unknown. And if anything, if this heightens your index of awareness, I hope it served its purpose. I would think that here was either a known unknown or perhaps even an unknown unknown. There was speculation about a lightning strike. One can debate that. Something else that we spoke about, and perhaps I also need to confess that I've been guilty in the past for not walking up to someone to ask what the idea was with that approach. I have very, very low hours. They are unspeakably low. But you realize that a downwind approach to a pad seems a pretty bad idea if you watch certain things. Now, if you will bear with me to look at another video, and it will be fairly brief, I hope to stick to time. Do you know your machine? You have so many hours on that machine. You've acquired impressive skills. You can really play to the camera lens if the moment arises. You know that you can put up a display with confidence and skill. We see that regrettably quite often. You've been doing this for a decade or 2 or 3. Are you naturally given to complacency, or do you break that boredom with a show of competence? I am not suggesting that what I'm going to show you fits into any of those categories. I'm just asking whether you've seen anything like this before. Pretty normal, isn't it? I don't get nods. Let's watch a part again. It is horrifying to watch. What struck me is how quickly it happened. The questions I have is, were there known things that could have been taken into account? Were there procedures, were there rules that might have helped? A last story, if I'm permitted to quickly push it in. I'm going to talk about possibly foreseeable conspiring circumstances. We often hear, I only did X once in training, or I wasn't told about this, and when you page back, it did actually happen. So there are certain things you can't really train for, but you can read about them, you can watch videos about them, you can be on top of them. So again, let's talk about whether or not we see known unknowns, known knowns, and unknown knowns. Imagine a weekend, and there's an arrangement that's made that next Saturday, 12 o'clock, we'll go for a flight. And again, the facts I'm making up now, they have no relation to the actual event. We'll go at 12 o'clock next week, and the arrangements are made. It might be a group of friends, or it might be a group of high-ranking dignitaries, that there's an arrangement that they'll be picked up at 12 and be taken to point X. It applies in all circumstances. It creates expectations. And of course, we keep promises. and we can mostly make it work. You are very diligent. You've done your weight and balance well in advance. You have a best guess expectation of what your passengers' weights are, or you just put in the stock standard max weight for passengers, and there you go. But you do that much earlier in the week. On the day you arrive, and it's a scorcher of a day, let's say it's at an elevation of 4,500 foot. You are ready, everyone is buzzing with excitement. The tanks are topped off, it's full. You're quite comfortable with your passenger weight estimations, and you have a quick look at your weight and balance on your guesstimates, and it appears that you're just within your maximum all-up weight or maximum takeoff weight. Temperatures, high 30s, typical for the area, and you worked out that your density altitude, and we've heard about this a bit earlier, is give or take 8,500, 9,000 foot. Hot day, probably 38 or so degrees Celsius. What are the known knowns a week before? What are the known unknowns when the promises were made a week before? What, in comparison, are the known knowns minutes before departure and the unknown knowns at that point in time? Have I checked, rechecked, done my calculations, opened the flight manual, looked at the temperature? Did I guess or calculate the exact weight and balance? Have I looked at the hover out of ground effect chart, which may, if I understand it correctly, be rather relevant in these circumstances? We're going to move to that in a moment. Will there be any worrisome wind azimuths during my phases of flight or hovering? Especially when you do a circular route or plan a circular route. Did I check my height velocity diagram? Now, it's very easy to read it and to realize that it's really designed for engine failure and so on. But other things might happen, and I would suggest to you it's a good idea not to only read it through the lens of possible engine failure. Will, having considered the out-of-ground hover effect, height velocity diagram, inform the height I operate at in order to give me a chance? And we've already seen some of those examples. Will I have an opportunity if something might not go my way? So have I used my most current data minutes before the flight and turned those unknowns into knowns? Right. So I think let's have a look at a video, and you know some of the factual background. I invite you to see what you spot. Buddha says slow, low, probably hot. We know that it's 38 degrees Celsius in our example with a density altitude of 8,500, 9,000. We are full, topped off. It happens quickly. It is terrible to watch these things. We don't sit here in the judgment with any judgment of hindsight. My invitation to you is to apply your knowledge. Be hungry for knowledge, because knowledge feeds foresight, and foresight potentiates avoidability. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Buddha.
So you mentioned earlier, where does instruction start and where does... it's clearly a point that hasn't been defined yet. So how would it be applied in practice?
Yeah, so I don't have a textbook answer for you, because if it wasn't a textbook, I'm quite sure you would quote it to me. But what we have in that example is we know that there's a statement by the instructor that the shutdown has not happened, but there was an expectation of shutdown. Now, I have perhaps a far too conservative view of when instruction might stop. The aircraft landed. What happens after that? And it's not simply rhetorical. There's normally a debrief. There are so many things that happen. So I would suggest that very often that instruction ends at the end of the debriefing. For one possible reason. If you're filling out your take on the understanding of the student whilst the engine is still running, and whilst the exercise is not fully complete, because here we've got an expectation that there be a proper shutdown, which wasn't done, I would imagine that it's too early to score. And it certainly calls for a debrief. So I would suggest that the instruction ends at the end of that debrief, because that debrief might give us a better understanding of what might have gone wrong. And you may even score differently because of the perspective that it gives you. It might still not result in competence, but you might have a different take on it in the end. My very conservative take on this is that instruction does not end where this witness said it did. I think instruction ends when you shake hands and you wish one another a safe next journey. Thank you.